In a quiet village bedroom, lit only by a flickering lantern, a stunning young woman lies motionless on a soaked mattress. Her wrapper clings to her skin, drenched. The room is silent, but something feels wrong. A man sits up slowly beside her, confused. He touches the bed, sniffs the air, then freezes. He looks at her, eyes wide with disbelief. She doesn't move. Her beauty is flawless, untouched, but the bedsheet beneath them is stained again. And this time, he knows it's not sweat, and it's not an accident. In the village of Ninkara, where the wind hummed lullabies through banana leaves and the ground remembered the footsteps of every sorrow, there lived a girl named Nene. Her skin glowed like roasted groundnuts kissed by the evening sun, and her eyes carried the sadness of clouds just before they break into rain. Even as a child, Nene was unlike the others. Where they ran and played and shouted in the dusty heat, Nene walked quietly, barefoot, with her hands behind her back and her head tilted like she was listening to something only she could hear. People said she had the face of a bride and the soul of an old woman. She smiled with her lips, but never with her eyes. Mothers whispered to their sons, "Look well, that's wife material." And sons stared too long, hypnotized by her beauty. But what none of them knew, what even Nene herself didn't understand back then, was that her body held a secret that crept in silently one night, like a shadow with no footsteps, and never left. As Nene grew older, the whispers grew louder. She never lacked admirers. Boys from town, traders from across the river, even married men with swollen egos and wandering eyes. They all came to her with promises dipped in honey. Some brought bread, others perfume, and a few offered futures built on wealth. But Nene always kept her heart behind a locked door no one could enter, not fully. She accepted compliments with grace and gifts with caution. She would walk beside a man, even laugh under the moonlight. But when the night deepened, she would quietly excuse herself and return home alone. No one had ever seen her sleep over, not even once. Some called her a mystery, others called her arrogant, but the truth was far more painful. Each night, as the crickets began their songs and the village lights dimmed, Nene would prepare for battle, a battle no one could see. She would carefully lay thick cloth on her mattress, wrap herself in layers, and place a small plastic sheet underneath. Then she would pray, not for dreams or blessings, but simply for dryness. But it never came. By morning, the sheets would be wet, her clothes soaked, the room filled with a sharp, shameful scent. And every single time, she would clean in silence, scrubbing, rinsing, drying, before anyone could know. Her hands were fast, but her spirit grew slower each day. People in the village only saw her smile, her grace, her flawless skin. But what they didn't see was the bucket hidden behind her bed, the stained wrappers soaked under moonlight, or the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Her beauty made her unforgettable, but her secret made her untouchable. No one knew the truth, and not her friends, not the suitors, not even her father, who had long abandoned her. Only one woman knew everything, the one who raised her grandmother. And the grandmother always said the same thing: it will stop with time. But time was not a healer. It was a prison. Because with every passing night, Nene realized this wasn't just a body problem. It was a curse, and it had teeth. Nene met Ifa on a rainy Thursday beneath a rusted zinc shade where they both waited for the downpour to soften. He offered her his umbrella, even though the walk to her compound was in the opposite direction. His shoes sank into the mud, but his smile never faded. He was different, quiet but warm, patient without trying too hard. He didn't chase her like the others. He simply walked beside her day after day until his presence felt like sunlight in the cold. He came bearing gifts, not of perfume or wine, but of time. He helped her grandmother carry firewood, fixed the broken lock on their front door, and waited with her when her feet ached from market errands. The village began to whisper again, but this time they whispered hope. Eventually, Nene allowed her heart to lean. Eve asked for her hand, and her grandmother gave her blessing. The wedding was simple. Palm wine, soft music, and dancing that made the earth feel lighter. For the first time in years, Nene felt like maybe, just maybe, her secret wouldn't matter. That night, she prepared in silence. She laid 2 towels on the bed, wore 2 layers of adult pads beneath her night wrapper, and placed a rubber mat beneath the sheet. She sprayed perfume across the room and set an alarm for 2:30 a.m. She didn't tell Ife the truth. Not yet. She told herself she needed just one dry night before she would speak. Just one. But that night, sleep took her faster than she expected. And by morning, the bed was soaked. Her wrapper was damp. The towels had failed. Her body, once again, betrayed her. She woke before Eve and cleaned fast. Fast enough that he never stirred. The second night, the same thing. The third, again. And then came the fourth night. That night, she didn't wake in time. Efe turned in his sleep, felt the wetness, and sat up slowly. He touched the sheet. His nose twitched. He looked at Nene, still asleep, still beautiful, still lying in soaked shame. He said nothing that morning, but something had shifted. In his silence, Nene could feel it, the beginning of another goodbye, if no longer stayed close. His voice, once warm like morning pap, turned cold like forgotten rainwater. He came home later each evening. His hands no longer reached for Nene in the dark. And when she smiled, he only nodded. She tried harder. More towels, more diapers. She even began to sleep on the floor beside the bed, wrapped in a plastic mat, pretending her back ached. When F asked, she smiled and said it was just muscle pain. He didn't ask further. He only sighed and turned away. One night, she didn't sleep at all. She just watched the ceiling, praying for dawn. She thought maybe if she stayed awake, nothing would happen. But by morning, the mat was soaked. The curse, whatever it was, never slept. Then came the envelope. It sat on the wooden stool by the window. Brown, silent, heavy. Nene picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside were divorce papers. No words, no notes, just names, signatures, and silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any fight. She didn't cry that day. She just folded the paper, packed her things slowly, and placed the wedding photo face down on the floor. Then she walked out of the house with dry eyes, but a flooded soul. She returned to her grandmother's compound, the same place where the shame had begun. Her grandmother was peeling garden eggs by the fire, calm as ever. She looked up as Nene entered, said nothing, and opened her arms. Nene walked into them, and the hug felt warm, but her chest remained cold. That evening, Nene sat under the guava tree, her head bowed low. The weight of failed love, of soiled sheets, of endless nights wrapped in fear, crushed her spirit. She whispered to the wind that maybe this was her fate, to be beautiful, to be wanted, but never kept. Her grandmother watched from the doorway, her face unreadable, her eyes distant. Behind that silence, something ancient stirred, because the truth was, Nene's beauty wasn't the only thing hiding a secret, and her shame, was never hers to carry alone. Nene was only 7 when her father brought her to the village. Her parents had just separated. Loud voices, broken plates, crying behind closed doors. Her mother refused to let her go at first, but her father insisted. She will be safe with Mama, he had said. So Nene was left at her grandmother's compound, a quiet house at the edge of the village with walls that whispered and shadows that lingered. That very first week it began. She wet the bed. Once, then twice, then every single night. At first, she thought it was because of stress. She told her grandmother. Her grandmother only said, "It will stop with time." No doctor came. No priest prayed. No questions were asked. She began to fear sleep, fear the night. Her body became her enemy, and her mornings began with cleaning, hiding, scrubbing, all while pretending nothing was wrong. By age 10, she could change sheets faster than most women could sweep a compound. By age 12, she could smile in shame's face and never blink. No one else knew. No one cared enough to ask except her grandmother. And yet, she never helped. Nene sometimes wondered why the old woman seemed so unaffected, so uninterested. But over time, the wondering stopped. Survival replaced it. And when men began to notice her beauty, Nene learned to build walls, beautiful walls with painted smiles and polished laughter. But now, sitting again under the same guava tree so many years later, Nene thought about that very first week, about the cold night she first felt the wetness, about how it never stopped, about how every man who loved her eventually walked away. She lifted her eyes and stared at the cracked walls of the house. There was something in this house, something she had lived with for years. And though she never dared speak it aloud, she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, her grandmother knew more than she had ever said. That night, Nene had a dream. Not the type that fades with the sun, but the kind that sticks to your skin like sweat in Harmattan. She stood in the middle of the room she'd always slept in. The walls bled black liquid. Her childhood bed was soaked, and above it hung a mirror that showed not her reflection, but a young version of herself crying silently. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved. It had no face, no name, just presence, heavy, watching. It whispered her name again and again until she turned. And then she saw her grandmother, younger, stronger, bearing the same red wrapper she used to tie on market days. But her eyes were dark, not with age, but with something deeper, something dangerous. Nene tried to speak, but her mouth would not open. Her feet would not move. The room began to spin, and the mirror cracked, a loud scream shattering the silence. She woke up sweating, the bed soaked again, the mat beneath her useless. The curse had not stopped. Even in dreams, it found her. That morning, she didn't hide it. She sat on the wet mat and stared at the stain, unmoving. The shame no longer stung. It had become part of her. But her heart was tired. She stood, cleaned herself slowly, and walked into the kitchen where her grandmother was slicing yam. She watched her for a long time, and then she spoke. "Something is wrong with me," she said quietly. Her grandmother didn't look up. "It started when I came here." Still, the knife kept cutting. "I feel like I was marked by something or someone." The knife paused, just for a second. Then it continued, and her grandmother said softly, "It will stop with time." Nene looked away, but something inside her knew. Time wasn't the cure, it was the curse. Life continued like old shoes, worn, familiar, and heavy. Nene spoke little, smiled rarely, and carried her shame like cloth soaked in rain until Mark came. He wasn't like the others. He didn't have a car or fine clothes or perfume. He had dust on his sandals, chalk under his fingernails, and books tied in old rubber bands. A teacher in the junior school, he often passed by the compound and greeted her grandmother with respect, but his eyes always searched for Nene. He didn't chase her. He simply appeared again and again, helping carry water, fixing the back gate, sitting silently under the almond tree while she peeled groundnuts. Slowly, her silence began to crack. If she laughed, just a little. She shared stories, just a few. She looked him in the eyes, just once. Then, one quiet afternoon, he asked if she would marry him. She didn't answer right away. Her heart had grown skeptical. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no fear, no judgment, just patience. She agreed, but in her heart, she made a vow. He must never find out. The wedding was simple, quiet, and peaceful. There were no loud drums or gossiping neighbors, just promises made under a mango tree and prayers said with hands joined tight. And that night, Nene returned to war. She laid down her weapons, two thick adult diapers, a folded wrapper, a towel, a plastic sheet. She sprayed perfume on the pillow. She placed a change of cloth under the bed. She set alarms. She stayed awake as long as she could. But even warriors grow tired. And before dawn, the wetness returned. She woke first, cleaned it all, hid it all, smiled like victory. The next night, same. The third night, worse. But Mark never asked. Not yet. And Nene began to believe that maybe he would never know. But shame is not a quiet tenant. It leaks, it stains, and one day it finds the light. Mark came home early that night. He was quiet, thoughtful. He had been watching her closely for days now, not with suspicion, but with silent concern. That evening, Nene laid out her layers once again. Diapers, towels, wrappers, perfume, alarms. Her heart beat like talking drums as Mark turned off the lamp and laid beside her. She didn't sleep. She only pretended. But sleep has a way of sneaking in when your guard is down. At 2:12 a.m., the alarm rang. She didn't hear it. Her body was too heavy, her mind too far, and the bed too wet. Mark opened his eyes. He didn't move at first, just listened. The soft sound of liquid against cloth, the sharp smell in the air. He turned slightly. His hand touched the edge of the soaked towel. Still, he said nothing. Nene stirred. Her body froze the moment she felt the dampness. Her eyes snapped open. Her breath quickened. In one motion she stood, pulled the diaper off, wiped the bed, changed the wrapper, dried the sheet with a hand dryer, her movements fast, familiar, like she had done it 100 times. She didn't know Mark was watching. He watched, not with anger, not with disgust, just with eyes full of questions and sadness. When she returned under the sheet, the room was quiet again, but something had changed. The next morning, he said nothing. She smiled like nothing happened, but Mark looked into her eyes and gently asked, "Are you sure everything is okay?" She nodded. Yes, but she could tell he knew, not everything, but enough. That night, Mark stayed awake. He watched again, and this time, he turned on the light. Nene was in the middle of wiping the towel, her wrapper soaked, her hands shaking. The silence shattered. She froze. He sat up. Their eyes met. In that moment, a secret stood naked between them. No more hiding, no more layers, no more pretending. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. Nene sat at the edge of the bed, Her wrapper was soaked. The towel lay useless in her lap. Her hands trembled, her lips dry. Mark sat beside her, no touching, no speaking, just waiting. She began slowly, her voice a whisper of rain. She told him everything, from the first night it started when she was 7, how her father left her in this very house, how the wetness began without reason, how it followed her through childhood into womanhood and now into marriage. She told him about the men who left, the ones who promised forever but couldn't stay through the night, the way shame had built a room inside her chest and locked her spirit inside. She cried, not loudly, just soft, broken sobs. And then she spoke of the dreams, the mirror, the shadow, the feeling that something old and evil lived in the walls of the house. Mark listened. His hands remained still, his face calm. When she finished, he spoke just once. We're going to see my father. Mark's father was an old pastor, a man known not for loud preaching, but quiet prayers that stirred the ground. His house smelled of oil, ash, and faith. He looked at Nene with deep, knowing eyes. Who raised you? He asked. My grandmother, Nene replied. The old pastor stood slowly. His face changed. We must see her, he said. Something is buried there. Later that day, Nene returned home and told her grandmother that Mark's father wanted to pray with her. Her grandmother's face changed. Her hands trembled. Tell that man to mind his business, she said coldly. Nene had never seen her afraid until now. The next morning, they didn't wait. Mark, his father, and Nene drove to the house. Her grandmother was in the backyard, cooking yam. When she saw them with the Bible in hand, her eyes widened. She turned to run, but the pastor's voice boomed like thunder. Stop there! And that was the moment everything began to unravel. The wind stood still. Her grandmother froze, spoon in hand, face twisted with fear. The pastor stepped forward, opened his Bible, and began to pray. Not with fire, but with force. His voice didn't scream. It roared softly, like thunder behind closed clouds. As he sprinkled anointing water into the air, Nene's grandmother dropped the spoon and grabbed her head. Her knees buckled. Her mouth opened wide, but no words came out. Then she began to shake. First gently, then violently. Her eyes rolled back. Her voice broke through the silence, deep and unnatural. I'll confess, she screamed. The ground itself seemed to tremble. She fell forward, clawing at the earth. I cursed her parents' marriage. I did it so the child would be brought to me. Tears streamed down Nene's face. When they brought her here, the grandmother cried, I gave her to my coven. Every night she wets the bed. My power grows. Her shame feeds me. Her sorrow gives me rank. The pastor prayed louder. The winds howled. Chickens fled from the compound. The trees shook. I needed it to continue, she screamed. That's why I never helped her. That's why I told her to wait for time. Then her body twisted one final time. She let out a sharp, long wail and collapsed. No breath, no pulse, just silence. She died there, on the very ground she had cursed. That night, Nene slept on a bare bed. No diaper, no towel, no plastic, just cotton sheets and quiet air. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she was 7, the bed stayed dry. The shame was gone. The curse was broken. Mark held her through the night, not as a man carrying pity, but as one carrying love. The next morning, Nain touched the bed sheet and smiled. Dry, clean, free. She turned to Mark, and he smiled too. And deep in her heart, the silence broke, replaced by peace. Because sometimes the most beautiful people carry the heaviest burdens, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay.